The snow fell gently outside my window, dusting the world in a quiet, shimmering white. It was the kind of Christmas Eve that felt like it belonged in a storybook, soft, cold, and full of promise. My hands, wrinkled but steady, adjusted the tablecloth I'd ironed that morning. The dining room glowed with the warmth of candlelight, the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon-spiced pie filling the air. I'd spent days preparing for tonight. Every detail crafted with love, the polished silverware, the cranberry centerpiece, the playlist of carols humming softly in the background. This wasn't just dinner, it was a gesture, a bridge, a hope to mend what had been breaking for years. My son, Daniel, and his wife, Claire, were coming. At least, they'd said they would. It had been months since I'd seen them. And even then, our last meeting had been brief, a hurried coffee at a cafe near their apartment, where Claire checked her phone more than she spoke, and Daniel's eyes darted nervously between us. I'd felt like an intruder in their lives, a relic they didn't quite know what to do with. But this was Christmas, a time for second chances. I'd called them a week ago, my voice trembling as I invited them to dinner. Just the three of us, I'd said. Like old times. Daniel had hesitated, but Claire's crisp voice had cut in. We'll be there, Margaret. 7 sharp. I glanced at the clock, 6:55 p.m. The table was perfect, the fire crackling in the hearth. I smoothed my dress, a deep green velvet I'd chosen because Daniel once said it made me look regal, and waited. My heart, foolishly hopeful, beat a little faster. By 7:15, the snow had thickened, and the silence in the house felt heavier than the carols could lift. I checked my phone. No messages. I called Daniel's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Claire's did the same. I told myself they were stuck in traffic, that the snow had slowed them down. By 7:30, I poured myself a glass of wine, the glass trembling slightly in my hand. By 8 o'clock, the turkey was cooling, the candles burning low. I sat at the head of the table, staring at the 2 empty chairs across from me, their absence louder than any words. They weren't coming. The realization hit like a slow, dull ache. I pictured them at some trendy holiday party, Claire in her sleek red dress, Daniel laughing with strangers, their lives too full, too fast, to include me. I was 72 years old, and I'd spent my life building a home, raising a son, believing that love was enough to keep us tethered. But somewhere along the way, I'd become invisible to them. The pain wasn't just in their absence, it was in the years of distance that had led to this moment. The unanswered calls, the canceled visits, the way Daniel's "I love you, Mom" had grown rote, like a line he felt obligated to say. I stood, my knees creaking, and walked to the window. The snow was relentless now, burying the world in white. I could have cried, could have let the hurt swallow me whole. But something else stirred inside me, a spark, small but stubborn. I wasn't done yet. Not with them. Not with myself. Not with this life. If they wouldn't come to me, I'd find a way to make them see me. Not out of spite, but because I deserved to be seen. I returned to the table, blew out the candles, and covered the food. The house felt too quiet, too empty. But I wasn't. Not anymore. I pulled out my old notebook, the one I used to jot down recipes and dreams, and began to write. Not a letter to Daniel or Claire, but a plan. A big one. If they thought they could leave me behind, they were wrong. I'd show the man myself what Margaret Elaine Harper was still capable of. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but it fueled me now. I spent the day calling old friends, people I hadn't spoken to in too long, neighbors, former colleagues, the women from my book club who drifted away after my husband, Tom, Past 5 years ago, I invited them to my house the next evening, Boxing Day, for a feast. Not the turkey dinner I'd made for Daniel and Claire that felt too sacred, too personal, but a new kind of gathering. A potluck. I told them, bring a dish, bring a story, bring yourself. By evening, my living room was alive with voices. There was Ruth, my high school friend, who brought her famous pecan pie and a laugh that could fill a room. There was James, the widower from down the street, who carried a tray of cornbread and a quiet kindness that made my heart ache less. There were others, two friends of friends, a young couple new to the neighborhood, even a stray college student who'd heard about the gathering from Ruth's daughter. They filled my home with warmth, their stories weaving together like a tapestry. We ate. We laughed. We sang off-key to the carols still playing on my old stereo. I looked around at the faces, some familiar, some new, and felt something shift inside me. This was what I'd been missing, not just my son, but a sense of belonging, of purpose. I'd spent so long waiting for Daniel to fill that space. But maybe I didn't need to wait. Maybe I could build it myself. As the night wound down, Ruth pulled me aside. "Margaret, this was wonderful," she said, her eyes bright. "You should do this again. Make it a tradition." Her words planted a seed. A tradition. Something bigger than one night. Bigger than my disappointment. I went to bed that night, not with the weight of abandonment, but with the spark of an idea. The next day, I started planning. I'd always loved cooking, loved bringing people together. What if I turned that love into something more? Not just a dinner, but a community. A place where no one had to feel alone, especially not during the holidays. I spent hours researching, calling local organizations, and sketching out ideas in my notebook. By the end of the week, I had a vision, a community dinner series, hosted at the local community center, open to anyone who needed a seat at the table. I called it the Open Hearth. I reached out to the community center's director, a kind woman named Linda who'd known Tom and me for years. She loved the idea and offered the space for free. I enlisted Ruth and James to help spread the word. And soon, flyers were up around town, inviting people to the first Open Hearth dinner in January. I didn't know what to expect, but I poured myself into it, planning menus, recruiting volunteers, even teaching myself how to use social media to promote the event. It wasn't easy. My fingers fumbled on the keyboard, and my eyes strained at the screen. But every step felt like a declaration. I was still here, still capable, still Margaret. The first Open Hearth dinner was small but vibrant. 20 people came, some elderly, some young, some alone, some with families. We shared lasagna, stories, and laughter. A retired teacher told me it was the first time she'd felt seen since her husband died. A young man, barely out of his teens, said he'd been eating alone in his apartment for months. I listened, my heart swelling and breaking at once. This was what I'd been searching for, what I'd needed as much as they did. Word spread. By February, the dinners were weekly, and the community center was packed. I taught cooking classes on the side, showing people how to make Tom's favorite meatloaf or my mother's apple crumble. I wasn't just feeding people. I was building something of family, not of blood, but of shared moments. And yet, in the quiet of my own home, I still thought of Daniel and Claire. I wondered if they'd heard about what I was doing. I wondered if they cared. One evening in March, as I was cleaning up after a dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "Mom, I heard about your dinners. Can we talk?" My heart skipped, but I didn't reply right away. I wasn't ready to let them back, and not yet. Not until I was sure they understood what they'd left behind. The weeks following Daniel's text were a whirlwind. The Open Hearth dinners grew, drawing more people each time. I'd lie awake at night, not out of loneliness now, but because my mind buzzed with ideas, new recipes, guest speakers, ways to make the community center feel like home for everyone who walked through its doors. I was tired. Yes, but it was the good kind of tired. The kind that came from pouring yourself into something bigger than you. Still, Daniel's message lingered like an unanswered question. I hadn't responded. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to ask why he and Claire had left me alone on Christmas. But another part, the part that had spent months building something new, wasn't ready to open that door again. Not until I was sure it wouldn't lead back to the same hurt. By April, the open hearth had become a local phenomenon. The town paper ran a story about it, complete with a photo of me stirring a pot of chili, my face lit with a smile I barely recognized. Local widow turns heartbreak into community. The headline read. I cringed at the word widow, but I couldn't deny the truth in the rest. People started calling me Miss Margaret, a title that made me laugh since when was I a miss? But it stuck. And soon, I was Miss Margaret to everyone, the volunteers, the regulars, the newcomers who showed up with shy smiles and covered dishes. One evening, as I was setting up for a dinner, Ruth pulled me aside. You know Daniel's been asking about you, she said, her voice gentle but probing. He called me last week. Said he saw the article. I busied myself with arranging napkins, avoiding her eyes. What did he say? He sounded proud, I think, and maybe a little guilty. She paused, watching me. You should talk to him, Margaret. He's your son. I nodded, but my throat tightened. Proud. Guilty. Those words felt like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. I changed the subject, asking Ruth to help me move a table. But her words stayed with me. That night, after the dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my phone. Daniel's text was still there, unanswered. I typed out a reply. I'd like to talk. Come to the next open hearth dinner. Bring Claire. And hit send before I could overthink it. The next dinner was a week later, and I was a bundle of nerves. I didn't know if they'd show up, and part of me hoped they wouldn't. The community center was packed that night, with over 50 people filling the tables. We'd made shepherd's pie, a recipe I'd learned from my mother, and the room smelled of savory herbs and warmth. I moved through the crowd, greeting people, refilling water pitchers, trying to keep my mind off the door. Then I saw them. Daniel, in a navy coat, his hair thinner than I remembered, and Claire, her face half hidden behind a scarf. They stood at the entrance, looking unsure, like they didn't belong. My heart lurched. I wanted to run to them, to hug them, to yell at them. Instead, I walked over, my hands clasped to keep them steady. Mom, Daniel said, his voice soft. This is incredible. Claire nodded, her eyes scanning the room. It's really something. Margaret. I forced a smile. I'm glad you came. There's a seat for you both. I led them to a table near the front, where Ruth and James were already sitting. They settled in, and I watched from a distance as they ate, talked, and even laughed with the others. For a moment, it felt like the old days, when Daniel was a boy and we'd spend evenings around the table, telling stories about our day. But it wasn't the same. I could see it in the way Daniel avoided my gaze, in the way Claire's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. They were here, but they weren't fully present. Not yet. After dinner, as people lingered over coffee and dessert, Daniel approached me. Can we talk somewhere private? He asked. We stepped into the community center's small office, a cluttered space with mismatched chairs and a flickering light. Claire stayed behind, chatting with Ruth. Daniel sat across from me, his hands fidgeting. Mom, I'm sorry about Christmas, he said, his voice breaking. We got caught up. Claire had a work thing, and I thought we'd make it. But then, you didn't call. I said, my voice quieter than I'd expected. You didn't even text. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I know. I messed up. I've been messing up for a while. I wanted to ask why, to demand answers for all the missed calls and canceled plans. But the hurt in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I said, I missed you, Daniel. Both of you. But I couldn't keep waiting. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I saw the article. What you're doing here, it's amazing. I didn't know you had this in you. I laughed. A small, bittersweet sound. Neither did I. We talked for a while. Not just about Christmas, but about everything the years since Tom died. The way life had pulled us in different directions. He told me about his job. The pressure he felt to keep up with Claire's ambitions. The way he sometimes felt like he was losing himself. I listened, not as the mother who'd been hurt, but as someone who'd learned how to rebuild after loss. When we rejoined the others, Claire was helping clear plates. Her usual polish softened by the warmth of the room. She caught my eye and smiled, not her usual tight-lipped smile, but something real. This place feels good, she said. It's alive. I didn't know if that night would change things between us, but it was a start. As they left, Daniel hugged me, his arms lingering longer than they had in years. I'll be back, Mom, he said. I promise. I watched them disappear into the night, the snow falling again, softer this time. I didn't know if he'd keep that promise, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could handle whatever came next. The open hearth wasn't just a place for others, it was my anchor. My proof that I could create something meaningful, even when the people I loved most let me down. Spring turned to summer, and the open hearth dinners became a cornerstone of the town. We moved some events outside, under strung lights and starry skies, with long tables covered in checkered cloths. People brought their children, their dogs, their stories. I learned names, faces, heartaches. There was Sarah, a single mother who'd lost her job but found solace in our shared meals. There was Mr. Thompson, a gruff veteran who softened when he talked about his late wife. Each person added a thread to the tapestry I was weaving, and I felt more alive than I had in years. Daniel and Claire came to a few more dinners, though not as often as I'd hoped. Each time, they seemed a little more at ease, a little more like they belonged. Claire even started helping in the kitchen, her precise hands chopping vegetables with a focus I hadn't seen in her before. Daniel would linger after the meals, asking about the people, the recipes, the stories. I could see he was trying, but there was still a distance between us, a gap I wasn't sure how to bridge. One evening in July, as we cleaned up after a barbecue-themed dinner, Daniel stayed late to help stack chairs. The community center was quiet, the last guest gone, the air still warm with the scent of grilled corn and watermelon. Mom, he said, setting down a chair. I want to do more. Not just show up, but help. Really help. I looked at him, his face earnest in the dim light. What do you mean? I don't know, he admitted. Maybe I could help organize, or fundraise, or something. I see what this means to you, to everyone. I want to be part of it. I wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. This isn't a hobby, Daniel, I said. It's work. It's commitment. It's showing up, even when it's hard. He nodded, his jaw tight. I know I haven't been good at that, but I want to try. I didn't say yes right away. I told him to think about it, to talk to Claire, to come back with a real plan. He did. A week later, he and Claire sat me down with a proposal, They'd help fund a website for the open hearth, something to share our story, attract donations, and make it easier for people to sign up as volunteers or guests. Claire, with her marketing background, had ideas for branding, while Daniel offered to handle the technical side. It was the first time I'd seen them work together on something that wasn't about their careers or their image. We launched the website in August, and it was a game changer. Donations poured in, not just money, but supplies, food, even offers of free entertainment for future dinners. A local band played at our next event, and a photographer volunteered to capture the moments. The Open Hearth wasn't just a dinner series anymore. It was a movement. And for the first time, I felt like Daniel and Claire were part of it. Not just spectators. But growth brought challenges. The community center was too small for the crowds, and we needed more volunteers to keep up. I was exhausted, my body reminding me I wasn't young anymore. Ruth and James were lifesavers, but they had their own lives, their own limits. I started to wonder if I'd taken on too much, if my big response to being abandoned had grown bigger than I could handle. One night, after a particularly chaotic dinner, I sat alone in the community center, staring at a pile of dirty dishes. I felt the weight of it all, the expectations, the gratitude, the fear of letting people down. I missed Tom, his steady presence, his way of making everything feel possible. I missed the simplicity of those early dinners, when it was just a handful of us around my dining table. Then the door opened, and Daniel walked in. He'd left an hour ago, but here he was, his sleeves rolled up. "Thought you could use some help," he said, grabbing a sponge. We washed dishes in silence for a while, the clink of plates and the hum of the dishwasher filling the space. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough. For the first time in years, I felt like my son was really there. "Mom," he said as we finished, drying his hands, "I'm proud of you. I don't say it enough, but I am." I looked at him, my boy who wasn't a boy anymore, and saw the man he was trying to become. "I'm proud of you too," I said, and meant it. That night, I went home and wrote in my notebook. Not a plan this time, but a reflection. The Open Hearth had started as a way to fill the emptiness Daniel and Claire had left, but it had become so much more. It had given me purpose, community, a reason to keep going. And maybe, just maybe, it was giving me my son back, too. By fall, the Open Hearth was a name everyone in town knew. We'd outgrown the community center and moved to a larger venue church hall with a spacious kitchen and room for 100 people. The dinners were now twice a week, with cooking classes and storytelling nights in between. I'd hired a small staff, paid for by donations, to help manage the logistics. But I was still the heart of it, stirring pots, greeting guests, listening to their stories. Daniel and Claire were more involved than ever. Claire took over the social media, posting photos of smiling faces and steaming dishes, her captions capturing the spirit of the Open Hearth in ways I never could. Daniel worked on expanding the website, adding a calendar for events and a form for volunteers. They weren't just helping, they were invested, showing up even when I didn't ask. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old hurts that surfaced in a glance or a sharp word. But we were trying, all of us, and that was enough for now. One crisp October evening, as we prepared for a harvest-themed dinner, Claire pulled me aside. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Christmas, we should have been there. I was so caught up in work, improving myself, that I didn't think about what it meant to you." I was stunned. Claire had always been polished, guarded, her emotions tucked neatly away. But here she was, raw and honest. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching. "It hurt, but I'm glad you're here now." She nodded, her eyes glistening. I want to do more. Maybe teach a class. I'm not much of a cook, but I could learn. I laughed, the sound easing the tension. You're on. We'll start with something simple. That night, as we served pumpkin soup and cornbread, I watched Claire move through the crowd, her usual reserve replaced by a quiet warmth. Daniel was at her side, joking with Mr. Thompson about football, his laughter genuine. I felt a pang not of pain, but of gratitude. They were here, not just physically, but emotionally. They were part of this. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you've found your footing. In November, the church hall's roof started leaking, and repairs would cost more than we had. Donations were steady, but not enough for a major expense. I lay awake at night, worrying about the future of the open hearth. What if we couldn't keep going? What if I'd built something only to watch it crumble? I didn't tell Daniel or Claire about the roof at first. I didn't want them to feel obligated, to think I was leaning on them to fix my problems. But Ruth, ever the meddler, mentioned it to Daniel during a dinner. The next day, he showed up at my house with a notebook of his own, filled with fundraising ideas, crowdfunding, a charity auction, even a holiday gala. We can do this, Mom, he said. Let us help. I hesitated, but his determination was contagious. We spent the next week planning a gala for early December, a grand event with live music, a silent auction, and a menu that showcased the best of the open hearth. Claire took charge of the guest list, inviting local business owners and community leaders. Daniel reached out to sponsors, his charm winning over even the grumpiest of donors. I focused on the food, creating a menu that told the story of the open hearth dishes from my childhood, from Tom's family, from the people who'd become my family over the past year. The gala was a success beyond anything I'd imagined. The hall was transformed with twinkling lights and evergreen garlands, the tables groaning with food. People bid generously on auction items, artwork, gift baskets, even a weekend at a local bed-and breakfast. By the end of the night, we'd raised enough to fix the roof and fund the open hearth for another year. As the guests mingled, Daniel found me in the kitchen, where I was sneaking a moment to catch my breath. Mom, you did this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. All of it. You turned something awful into this. I shook my head. We did this. All of us. He hugged me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had my son back, not just the boy I'd raised, but the man he'd become. Claire joined us, her face glowing with pride. We're a good team, she said, and I believed her. The gala wasn't just about the money. It was a reminder that the open hearth wasn't mine alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd walked through its doors, who'd shared a meal or a story or a moment. And it belonged to Daniel and Claire, too, in a way I hadn't dared hope for. As December rolled in, the air turned sharp with winter's bite, and the town buzzed with holiday preparations. The open hearth was thriving, but I was already looking ahead. The gala had given us breathing room, but I wanted more, not just for the dinners, but for the people who came to them. I started dreaming of a scholarship fund, a way to help young people like Sarah's son or the college student who'd found a home at our table. I wanted the open hearth to be a legacy, something that would outlive me. Daniel and Claire were all in. They suggested partnering with local schools to offer cooking workshops for kids, a way to teach life skills and build community. Claire even volunteered to lead a class, her newfound love for cooking surprising us all. Daniel proposed a mentorship program, pairing older volunteers with younger ones to share stories and skills. Their ideas were bold, ambitious, and I saw a spark in them I hadn't seen before, not just ambition for themselves, but for something bigger. Christmas Eve approached, and with it, a familiar ache. Last year's empty table still lingered in my memory. a wound that hadn't fully healed. But this year felt different. I wasn't hosting a private dinner at home. I was planning the biggest open hearth event yet. A Christmas feast open to anyone in town. The church hall was decked out in red and gold, with a towering tree donated by a local nursery. Volunteers bustled in the kitchen, and the air was thick with the scent of ham, gingerbread, and hope. Daniel and Claire arrived early, their arms full of decorations they'd bought themselves. We thought the place could use a little extra cheer, Claire said, handing me a box of glittering ornaments. I watched them work together, hanging tinsel and laughing, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the ovens. The feast was a triumph. Over 200 people came, families, loners, young and old, rich and poor. We served plates piled high with food, and the room echoed with laughter and carols. I moved through the crowd, my heart full, pausing to talk to Sarah, who'd just landed a new job, and Mr. Thompson, who'd brought a photo of his wife to share. I realized this was what I'd been building toward, not just a meal, but a moment where everyone felt they belonged. After dinner, Daniel stood to make a speech, something he'd insisted on doing. He looked nervous, his hands gripping the podium, but his voice was steady. "A year ago, I made a mistake," he said, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. "I let my mom down, but she didn't let that stop her. She built this family, this home for all of us. I'm here because of her, and I'm staying because of you." The room erupted in applause, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Claire squeezed my hand, her own eyes misty. "He means it," she whispered. "We both do." As the night wound down, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The snow was falling again, just like last year. But this time, I wasn't alone. Daniel and Claire joined me, their coats dusted with flakes. "Mom," Daniel said, "we want to host Christmas at our place next year. Just the three of us. No excuses." I smiled, my heart lighter than it had been in years. "I'd like that," I said, "but you're welcome at the open hearth anytime." We stood there, the three of us, watching the snow blanket the world in quiet beauty. I thought of Tom, of the life we'd built, of the love that had carried me through loss and loneliness to this moment. The open hearth wasn't just a response to being abandoned, it was a testament to what could be built from pain. A reminder that love, in all its forms, was worth fighting for. The new year brought changes I hadn't anticipated. The open hearth was no longer just a local story. A national magazine picked up the article from our town paper. And suddenly, I was getting calls from people across the country, asking how they could start their own community dinners. I spent hours on the phone, sharing recipes, advice, and the simple truth that had guided me. People need a place to belong, and food is a good place to start. Daniel and Claire became my partners in every sense. They moved closer to town, into a house just a few streets from mine, and their presence became a constant in my life. Claire's cooking classes were a hit, especially with the kids, who loved her knack for making even simple dishes feel like an adventure. Daniel took on a leadership role, coordinating volunteers and planning new initiatives, like a garden project to grow fresh produce for the dinners. They weren't just helping, they were carrying the open hearth forward, making it their own. One spring afternoon, as we planted tomatoes in the community garden, Daniel pulled me aside. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said, wiping dirt from his hands. "I want to write a book about this. About you. About the open hearth. About what it means to build something from nothing." I laughed, embarrassed. Who'd want to read about an old woman and her dinners? "Everyone," he said, his eyes serious. "You're not just an old woman, Mom. You're a force." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged him, the soil on his hands smudging my apron. Claire joined us, her laughter bright as she teased Daniel about his newfound farming skills. For the first time, I felt like we were a family again, not the one we'd been, but a new one, forged through hard-won lessons and shared purpose. The book took shape over the next few months, with Daniel interviewing me, Ruth, James, and dozens of open hearth regulars. He wrote about the Christmas that started it all, not shying away from his own mistakes, and about the community that grew from it. When it was published the following winter, it wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. It reached the people who needed it, people like me, who'd felt invisible, who'd wondered if their best days were behind them. The open hearth kept growing. We opened a second location in a neighboring town, with plans for a third. I stepped back from the day-to-day, letting Daniel, Claire, and the staff take the lead. But I was still there, stirring pots, telling stories, welcoming new faces. The scholarship fund I dreamed of became a reality, helping young people pursue their education, their dreams. Sarah's son was the first recipient, and I cried when he hugged me at the award ceremony, his gratitude a mirror of my own. On the second anniversary of that lonely Christmas Eve, I stood at the front of the church hall, looking out at a sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all part of the family I'd built. Daniel and Claire were there, their hands clasped, their smiles wide. Ruth raised a glass to me, her eyes twinkling with mischief. James led a toast, his voice steady and warm. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. The laughter, the clink of glasses, the warmth of the room said everything I wanted to say. I'd been abandoned. Yes, but I'd responded not with anger or despair, but with love, with community, with a life bigger than I'd ever imagined. As the night ended, I stepped outside, the snow falling once more. I closed my eyes, letting the flakes kiss my face, and felt Tom's presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet strength inside me. I'd lost so much, but I'd gained more, not just a son and daughter-in-law, but a purpose, a legacy, a reason to keep going. The open hearth wasn't just a place. It was a promise that no one had to be alone, that heartbreak could be the start of something beautiful, that love could always find a way. And as I stood there, surrounded by the life I'd built, I knew I'd kept that promise.